Set in the city of London in 1862, the film begins with a woman named Amelia Rennes who suddenly asks to get off the horse-drawn carriage that she was riding with her sister named Antonia before arriving at their destination. Amelia herself is a hot air balloon pilot. Antonia, who saw that Amelia was not feeling well, asked her to cancel her intention to make a flight that would make a new history. Not only Amelia, but will also make the flight with an air scientist named James Glaisher. Meanwhile, on the other hand, James and his friend John were waiting for Amelia, who never arrived. Everyone can't wait to see the hot air balloon fly. Because the weather at that time was getting cloudy, John also suggested that James postpone his flight. But James, who had been waiting for that moment for a long time, was sure that everything would be fine. Not long after, Amelia came accompanied by a rousing welcome from the residents. Amelia saw their enthusiasm and then showed them a circus-like attraction. Amelia also brought her dog to go up in the hot air balloon. Then she said that they would break the 23-feet flight record held by the French. After everything was ready, Amelia and James climbed into the hot air balloon basket to take off. The departure was accompanied by cheers and waving from the residents. Amelia then returned to show attractions for the support the residents gave them. Then Amelia dropped her dog, which made the residents look shocked. But Amelia had equipped the dog with a parachute so that her pet landed safely. 3 minutes passed. Now the hot air balloon is at an altitude of 3,120 feet. And now they can enjoy the beauty of the city of London from a height, especially James, who is making a flight in a hot air balloon for the first time. Then James, using his binoculars, saw a building they had used to see the hot air balloon fly with John. It reminded him of 2 years ago, where James dreams of wanting to fly in a hot air balloon as high as possible to observe and record everything to complete his research. At that time, James conveyed the idea in front of other scientists that if someone flew using a hot air balloon, then he could know the sky conditions, including predicting the weather. However, James was laughed at by senior scientists because of this idea. They say that the weather can never be predicted at all. Then they walked out of the room and left James. The news reached James' parents, especially his father, who was ashamed of James' research. But James remains convinced that the weather is predictable. In 9 minutes, James and Amelia flew. Now they are at an altitude of 400 feet and the air temperature is at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which indicates that the air is getting colder. This made Amelia ask James to help her put on a coat. Amelia also told James to wear a thicker jacket, but James didn't bring it. After that, James sent a letter he had recorded during the flight via birds to the scientists in case they never returned to Earth. Moments later, they entered a cumulonimbus cloud that amazed both of them at first. And it's true, like the research that James had done, that clouds are made of a collection of water vapor. But the beauty only lasted for a moment. Suddenly their hot air balloon experienced a shock, and then a storm came accompanied by a very frightening flash of lightning. The clear sky turned dark and depressing. The shock got so intense that James and Amelia were unable to control their bodies. Even James had an impact that caused his head to bleed. However, James has high spirits and strong determination. He then decided to stay and continue his journey. Then Amelia suggested that they go upstairs to escape the storm. But this made Amelia fall and was thrown down. Lucky she was able to grab the rope that was in the hot air balloon basket. Then James pulled on the rope and managed to grab Amelia's hand and then pulled her back into the basket. Because the rainstorm was getting heavier, they had to hold on so they wouldn't be thrown back. A few moments later, the rain slowly subsided, the sky began to clear and the hot air balloon returned to steady movement. On the other hand, John, through his binoculars, could no longer see James and Amelia's hot air balloon when the storm came. Then a small boy came to borrow John's binoculars. Shortly, through the binoculars, the little boy found a hot air balloon carrying James and Amelia. John was finally relieved that they were fine and made it through the storm. Meanwhile, 19 minutes have already flown. Between the clear sky, James and Amelia saw a very beautiful rainbow circle that made them very happy. They couldn't believe what they saw, so they shouted at him. However, they suddenly heard the sound of bells and the footsteps of horses that came from nowhere. The voices were sent by the clouds from below and then reached the sky. After that, Amelia also had a headache and then remembered the incident that once happened to her husband named Pierre when he fell while flying with her in a hot air balloon for the first time. Then we are shown the initial meeting between James and Amelia at a party. At that time, James, who knew that Amelia was the best air pilot in London, then asked her to fly for her research in predicting the weather so that it could benefit humanity. At first, Amelia refused to cooperate in James' mission. But after repeatedly convincing James, Amelia finally also wanted to help James. The next day, Amelia immediately made the hot air balloon. But Antonia did not allow Amelia to fly because she was afraid of losing Amelia, while Amelia said she wanted to make the most of her skills as a hot air balloon pilot and being in the air was her happiness. James and Amelia are now at 160 feet. After Amelia woke up, James then reminded her about Amelia's trip with Pierre in the hot air balloon, which ended in a disaster. But Amelia doesn't want to bring up that old story again. James then apologized because he didn't mean to make Amelia sad. After all, it was not easy for her. When Amelia was treating James' head wound, suddenly a butterfly was seen perched on a hot air balloon basket. Then another butterfly came and flew over them. And James remembered John's theory, who liked to study butterflies, that only butterflies were able to fly at that height, even more than birds. Amelia also thought back to Pierre. Her husband must be proud and happy because Amelia had made it to this point. She said that Pierre was a good person and had a sincere heart. Then Amelia thanked James for bringing and trusting him to participate in this research. The scene returns to the past when Amelia suddenly refuses to fly with James because she is still traumatized while everything is ready, and the costs incurred for the research are also not small. After that, James approached a man named Charles, who happened to be making a hot air balloon project to set a new record, and finally James asked for himself and Amelia, who used the hot air balloon to fly. Charles also agreed. In the evening, James goes to see his father, who is getting old and has a weak memory. James's father said that he supported him and asked James to prove to the senior scientists, who laughed at him about his research, that James was capable and could predict the weather. Then his father James gave his binoculars to help James during his air journey. Now James and Amelia are already at an altitude of 23 feet, which means they will break the previous record held by the French and set a new record. They were so very happy for the record, and thank each other. The hot air balloon kept taking them flying. James, who continued to record the height of the hot air balloon, said that now they were moving as if they were much faster. But Amelia said instead they had slowed down and decided to get off. James, who wanted to keep flying, asked Amelia not to let the hot air balloon down. James kept convincing Amelia not to come down. After they saw the stars seemed close and the beauty presented in front of them, Amelia complied with James' request to continue flying. The scene returns to the past, where one night John meets Amelia at his house to convince Amelia not to cancel the flight. After that, she visited Pierre's grave to say goodbye. The hot air balloon was flying higher. The air temperature was at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, making James and Amelia freeze with cold. And James kept taking notes about their current situation and then returned to giving messages via the dove he had brought. Then James threw all the objects in the hot air balloon basket so he could fly even higher. But Amelia says that James's actions could harm them at that altitude, until it causes a commotion between the two. James was bleeding from his nose. Then Amelia said that the depleted oxygen could affect his brain, and they have to get down quickly if they don't want to die. But James, who seemed to have lost his logic, said that Pierre's death was due to his carelessness. Meanwhile, what James is doing is for science. This made Amelia angry and then slapped James. Then Amelia explained that while they were flying, their hot air balloon tore, so they have to reduce all existing burdens. Until finally, Pierre threw himself down to reduce the burden and for Amelia to be safe. That's why Amelia always feels guilty about her husband's death, and this time he didn't want it to happen again. James finally understood and apologized for his attitude, and agreed to come down. Amelia then releases the gas valve, but after trying several times, the valve won't come off because it's frozen. Meanwhile, James just stood there cold. Amelia saw this and asked James to move so he wouldn't experience hypoxia, and asked James to hold on because Amelia would climb up to open the valve. Amelia slowly climbed up through the ropes on the hot air balloon in a state of shivering cold. In the end, his grip came loose and threw his body away. Fortunately, his legs were still strong enough to keep him from falling, which would have fatal consequences for his life. In a hanging position with her head down, Amelia remembered her husband's last words, which made Amelia get back up, and then slowly her hand began to move to reach for the rope, and finally succeeded. Amelia then tied herself up as a safety device. After that, she slowly climbed up, until finally arrived at the top of the hot air balloon. Then with the last of her strength using her hands and feet, Amelia tried to release the lever, and thanks to his unyielding struggle, the lever finally succeeded in expanding. This made him very tired, not to mention the cold that enveloped him. Soon Amelia was unconscious. The elevation is now 35 feet. After that, Amelia slowly slumped and fell. While her siblings and mother are waiting for news about Amelia, there is also no news. All they could do right now was pray. Elsewhere, scientists also could not see the whereabouts of James and Amelia's blimp. Luckily, Amelia, who fell from the hot air balloon, had previously used a safety device on her body so that she was still safe. Then Amelia moved towards the basket of hot air balloons, and after being in the basket then asked James to get up because they would soon be landing. But James was also unconscious. This made Amelia feel afraid because she did not want what happened in the past to happen again. But not long after, James finally woke up and revived the hope that had been lost. Then James got up and checked if they were now 28 feet. After that, James helped treat the wound on Amelia's hand. And James said he was very grateful and proud, even though he didn't know what happened to Amelia above to make this hot air balloon go down because James fainted. But what Amelia did was of course extraordinary. Slowly the snow fell, and they tried to catch the snow in a glass to drink after it melted later. Then James recorded all the discoveries in his book, and slowly the hot air balloon descended and was at an altitude of 23 feet. But suddenly the air balloon, which is in a state of deflating, goes down so fast. They were afraid that their landing would result in an accident. They also have to drop all the objects in the hot air balloon basket to reduce the burden, so that the hot air balloon can land safely. But that effort also failed to make the hot air balloon move stably. Then they climbed into the hot air balloon ring and then dropped the basket. However, these efforts have not been able to make the hot air balloon move stably. Amelia even thought about dropping herself, but James didn't want that to happen. If Amelia leaves, then James will do the same. James wanted them back safely, until finally James found a way to cut the parachute. And the effort this time was successful. Although it didn't make the hot air balloon move completely stable, at least they could reduce the speed of the hot air balloon. Then the hot air balloon began to descend by breaking through the trees so that James and Amelia landed in different places. They were separated. After that, Amelia hobbled and then looked for James' whereabouts, and soon they met. Then they help each other to go to the city where they live. A few days later, James announced in front of the scientists who used to belittle him about his discoveries during the flight, and James said if everything he did was for the common good. And for his discovery, James also received many awards. And the film ends.